Marco renames one helper function inside the payments module, and the reviewer reads the change and approves it. A while later, a service nobody touched in that pull request stops working. The old name was still being called from four other places, and not one of them was in the diff. The reviewer didn't miss those calls. It never had a way to look. All it can see is the text somebody handed it. So when Nadia asks the question that counts, was the rename safe? Nothing inside that diff can answer her. Freeze it right there, because this moment an agent that can't reach past what it was handed is what the exam asks about. The question is simple to say. What do you give an agent so it can reach the systems that hold the answer? That question comes from Domain 2, Tool Design and MCP Integration, roughly 11 of the 60 questions you'll sit. The guide splits it into 5 task statements, and this episode covers all 5 because they are one decision in 5 parts. By the end, you'll be able to watch an agent reach for the wrong thing and say which of the 5 is broken. The architect question parked in the corner all episode is the second of the 4. What can it touch? And the first place to look is the toolbox the reviewer is already holding. Start with the tools that already ship because the guide gives them a task statement of their own and it's new. 2 of them search, grep, looks inside files at content, so a function name, an error message, an import statement. Glob matches paths, names and extensions, so every test file under a directory without opening one. One searches text, the other searches names, and that's the whole split. 3 more touch files. Read and write work on the whole file, and edit makes a targeted change by matching text that has to be unique. That's the exam point, because when the anchor text appears twice, the edit fails and the fallback is read then write, which is Marco's rename because a renamed helper is exactly the string a file holds more than once. So point that toolbox at Nadia's question, grep for the old name, read the files that come back, then follow their imports. If the rename crosses wrapper modules, collect the exported names first and search each one. One oddity before you sit. The task statement lists 6 built-ins, including edit, a published scenario lists 5, and items follow the statement. The reviewer can reach the repository now, and it still picks the wrong tool, which is a different failure. The next failure is quieter, and it's the one this episode turns on. 2 of the reviewer's tools are analyze diff and analyze file, and each description is 1 line long. Neither says which to reach for when the change is a rename, so the reviewer guesses the same wrong way every time. The guide's own wording is that tool descriptions are the primary mechanism a model uses to select a tool. Sit with that. The model reads the description before it chooses, so the description is where the choice happens. So here is the line to carry in. A selection problem is a description problem. The documentation calls it by far the most important factor in tool performance and sets a floor of 3 or 4 sentences. Say what it does, when to use it, when not to, what each parameter changes and what it won't handle. 2 more moves ride along. Name the service in front of the action, fold a tool per verb into one and split any tool doing too much. Then the trap. A keyword in your system prompt can quietly override a description you wrote well. Say, analyze every change carefully in the prompt, and it'll reach for the tool with analyze in its name. Fix the descriptions and the repository is covered. Nobody on Nadia's team owns the tracker, though. So this is the boundary, and MCP is how the reviewer crosses it. 3 roles, because the exam wants the words. The host is the application, a client holds one connection, a server provides context. A server hands over 3 kinds of thing. Tools that do something, resources that are data, and prompts that are templates. Resources are the one people skip, and the guide calls them out. A catalog of issue summaries kills a pile of exploratory calls. So tools are how the agent acts, and resources are what it can see without asking. Then scoping close to a guaranteed item. A shared server goes in the project file at the repository root, a personal one in your user config. Credentials never sit in the checked-in file because it expands environment variables, and every configured server's tools go live at once. So see the scoping rule the short way: shared in the repository, personal in your home, secrets in neither. For a standard integration, take the community server that exists and describe its tools well enough to beat plain grep. One piece of that connection is still open, and it's the piece I taught wrong the first time. It's the transport, the wire a server actually talks over, and it's where I owe you a correction. There are two active transports. One runs a local process and talks over its standard input and output. The other is HTTP, a post for each message with an optional streaming response when a server answers in pieces. Here is the trap, and it's terminology rather than mechanics. One three-letter name means that streaming response inside the HTTP transport. The same three letters also name an older standalone transport that's being retired. So one name covers a live piece of one transport and a whole dead transport, and an item can lean on either. So don't memorize a count of transports. Work out which of the two the stem means. One rider. Cloud Code also accepts a WebSocket transport for a server that pushes events without being asked. Now the reviewer is finally connected and the tracker picks tonight to fall over. The tracker goes down for about a minute. Its tool returns one word, failed, and the reviewer escalates to a human. Nothing was broken. It needed to wait and call again, and that result gave it no way to know. So errors get a shape. The flag on the result says something went wrong, and what happens next comes from what you put beside it. Sort failures by kind. Transient means the service was unavailable. Validation means the input was bad. Then permission, which means it wasn't allowed, and a business rule, which means the answer is simply no. Return the category, return whether it's worth retrying, and return a sentence a person could read. One uniform failed across all four is why the reviewer guessed, and that guess was a retry that never had a chance. For a policy violation, mark it not retriable and say why in customer-friendly words. A subagent fixes its own transient failures and passes up only what it can't, with a partial result, and an empty result isn't a failure. The reviewer can reach and it can fail properly, so what's left is how much any one agent should hold. The fifth statement is how you spread tools across agents, and you met half of it 2 episodes back. An agent holding 18 tools selects worse than one holding 4 or 5, and a tool outside its specialty gets misused. So each subagent gets its roles tools, one narrow cross-role tool for a constant need, and a constrained version of anything general. The new half is tool choice. 3 settings. Auto lets the model decide, and it may answer in plain text without calling a tool. Any guarantees a call, and force names the exact tool, which is how you make one specific call happen first. So auto is a suggestion, any is a promise, and forced is an order, and a stem about a model chatting instead of calling wants any. That's all 5. Sit a real one and see whether they hold. This one's a real item from the guide's published samples. A support agent has 2 tools, get customer and look up order, and the logs show it calling get customer for order questions. Both descriptions are one line, both take similar identifiers, and the stem asks for the most effective first step. Option A. Add few short examples to the system prompt showing order queries routing to the right tool. Option B. Expand each description with input formats, example queries, edge cases, and when to pick it over the other. Option C. Build a routing layer that reads the user's input and pre-selects a tool from keywords and identifiers. Option D. Consolidate both tools into one that takes any identifier and works out which backend to query. Name it before you answer. This is a what can it touch question, and inside it, tool interface design. There is no must and no never in the stem, so the elimination rule stays holstered. 2 words decide this one instead, and those words are first step. C dies first because a routing layer steps around the language understanding you are already paying for. D is a real architecture and much bigger than a first step, while the descriptions are still the problem. A cost tokens on every call and leaves the cause alone, which is that neither description says what its tool is for. B is the answer. Lowest effort, highest leverage aimed straight at the cause instead of around it. There's the line again on a real item. A selection problem is a description problem. Look at where the reviewer stands tonight. It started this episode able to read a diff and nothing else. It has the built-in tools for the repository and servers for what it doesn't own, and its errors carry a category and a retry flag. Every agent holds a handful of tools, and Marco's rename gets caught because the reviewer can grab the old name outside the diff. One line to walk in with: a selection problem is a description problem. Next time, 3 teams pick this up and run it 3 different ways, and none of them agree on the rules.